thanks for your time. What does Australia Day mean to you?
Well, good morning, Tom, and everyone tuning in. Look, you've really covered it. I've been to an Aboriginal cleansing ceremony hosted by the Governor this morning. I've just come from a citizenship ceremony. I'm about to go to another one, and then I've got a function tonight. But for First Nations people, and for me in this country, Australia Day is a very conflicting day. It's a day that I think many Australians wouldn't realise that it is the day of commemorating the landing of the First Fleet, and that changed Aboriginal lives forever. And the sorts of disparity you see today can be traced back to that day of invasion, if you want to call it that. But I do think that it's important that we respect and get to know the full story about Australia.
So, I mean, is that Labor's policy? Can you outline what Labor's policy is on Australia Day and
yes,
the date itself?
Yeah. So Labor is not advocating a change of date. What we're asking people to do, and I think it's happening, we're asking people to spend part of the day in quiet reflection, thinking about the truth, thinking about what the First Fleet represented to First Peoples, and also being joyous about the fact that we live in a country with over 65,000 years of human history, which is very, very special. And it's just really crucial that people with an open mind and an open heart do understand that Australia Day means different things to different people, and to Aboriginal people, it's a very, very difficult day.
So, in terms of how the nation goes about Australia Day, is it your hope that it's in part, and I don't know, perhaps begins with commemoration, remembering what happened to First Nations people, the shock, the trauma, the deaths and so on, and then also perhaps later on in the day a focus to what has happened as being good since then?
Yeah, I think that is a good description of what Labor's position is. We're not saying don't celebrate today, and I mean, we have got so much to be proud of in Australia, particularly the multicultural story and the story of Australia, but it is crucial that the whole story is understood. And that's why Labor advocates strongly for the three elements of the Uluru Statement, an entrenched voice in the Constitution, a national process of truth-telling, and a national process for agreement and treaty making. But that issue of truth-telling is so important about today. As I said, we're not advocating a change of date, but we are advocating the way in which people observe the day, including sometime, perhaps a few moments, perhaps a bit longer, thinking about the whole story of Australia.
On the voice that you mentioned there, we've had some options laid out. Obviously, it's still in consultation mode, but it seems likely there'll be, if the coalition proposal goes forward, a body that advises government with no veto power, but you'd think that would still be significant if it's an official body set up that gives advice to the government on race policy, definitely, but most likely as well any policy that broadly affects Indigenous Australians. Does that part of it encapsulate what the voice called for?
Yes, it does. So the Uluru Statement suggested and asked a very modest ask, and that is for a voice to the Parliament. It was an advisory body and obviously can't veto anything that the Parliament does. And that is what Uluru called for, but they called for an enshrined voice in the Constitution, and that's absolutely critical.
So I understand that right now is the difference between you and the coalition. Is that worth not supporting this, though? Change like this is very hard to get popular support for. Could Labor still support this if everything else about this proposal you found satisfactory and it just wasn't that it was going to be enshrined in the Constitution? Could you support it? And then once people know that it's in place, it works, it's a good body, then it would be easier to get it enshrined?
Well, it's unclear to me what the government's intentions are. I think the latest iteration was an advisory body to the government. Now, that is a far cry from what Uluru said. Obviously, if the government does ever produce legislation, it's clear there'll be no referendum this year, which I think is an enormous shame. And really, if the government wanted to, they would have time to be able to do it. Labor will look at what the legislation is, but most importantly, we'll talk to First Nations people and take their direction on where we should head.